The Barents Sea in February ran at minus 23 degrees Celsius on the bridge wings. That number appeared in the morning weather report, listed between wind speed and sea state, and experienced Arctic operators translated it immediately into operational terms. Minus 23 meant that binocular eyepieces would frost over within 90 seconds of outdoor exposure. It meant that gloves, mandatory at minus 23, reduced fine motor control at the helm by a measurable margin. It meant that any crew member on a bridge wing was working against a metabolic clock. In the Barents Sea in February, the cold was not weather. It was the third party in every tactical equation. The U.S. destroyer was conducting a northern sea route transit in international waters of the Barents Sea, approximately 140 nautical miles north of the Kola Peninsula and 90 nautical miles south of the seasonal ice pack. The transit was lawful under UNCLOS. Russia disputed this, claiming extended continental shelf rights that the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf had not confirmed, and maintaining that certain transit corridors approached its strategic submarine bases on the Kola Peninsula, close enough to constitute a security concern that superseded freedom of navigation rights. Neither position had force in international law. Both had force in Russian operational doctrine. The destroyer had been in the Barents Sea for 11 hours. At 1:34 p.m., the routine ended. Bridge, CIC. New surface contact bearing 187, range 8 nautical miles. Contact is a large platform. Displacement estimate consistent with Vishnya-class intelligence collection vessel, 5,000 tons or above. Speed 8 knots. Contact is on an intercept course. Estimated CPA, 600 yards. Time to CPA, 22 minutes. The Vishnya-class. Not a warship in the conventional classification. A signals intelligence collection vessel, an AGI, designed with one purpose, to collect electronic emissions from adversary military platforms at close range. No weapons capable of threatening a surface warship. What it carried was the most comprehensive maritime SIGINT suite in the Russian Navy, capable of recording every radar pulse, every communications transmission, every electronic signature that a U.S. destroyer produced during high-readiness operations. The Vishnya's value was measured in the density and quality of the intelligence it harvested from each close approach, and in the strategic picture, those harvests assembled over time. 2 minutes after the Vishnya contact was logged, 2 additional contacts appeared. Bridge, CIC. 2 new surface contacts bearing 164 and 208, ranges 7.2 and 6.8 nautical miles. Both contacts consistent with Steregushchiy-class corvettes. Speed 16 knots. Both contacts on intercept courses. CPA estimates: Contact Bravo, 900 yards. Contact Charlie, 850 yards. Time to CPA, both contacts, approximately 19 minutes. The formation geometry was immediately clear. The Vishnya approaching from the south on a direct intercept, 2 corvettes from the southeast and southwest, a 3-point spread that would surround the destroyer from 3 quadrants simultaneously while placing the intelligence collection vessel at closest point. The corvettes were not the objective. They were the escort, the political cover, the operational context that justified what the Vishnya was there to do. The corvettes provided legal and political standing. The Vishnya provided the mission. At 1:36 p.m., the captain stepped onto the bridge. He read the contact picture in 15 seconds and understood it in 15 seconds. I have the con. The Vishnya's standard operational range for collection was 400 to 800 yards. At 600 yards, it could collect the full electromagnetic profile of the destroyer's operational systems, every radar type, every frequency, every pulse repetition interval, every communications band, with collection quality that degraded significantly if the target went to emissions control. The Vishnya needed the destroyer systems active and transmitting. It needed the destroyer to behave the way it behaved under high readiness conditions, radars running, communications active, all systems at operational status. If the destroyer went to EMCON, emissions control, reducing electromagnetic output to minimum, the Vishnya's collection quality degraded from comprehensive to marginal. High-value operational intelligence required the target to be active. The question was not whether to go to EMCON. The question was when. The captain had been calculating the answer since the Vishnya first appeared on radar. He had a specific number in mind, not 550 yards, not 430 yards. The number he had settled on during 11 hours of routine transit before 1:34 p.m. was the number at which the Vishnya would have committed enough time and proximity to the approach that, withdrawing at that point, represented an unambiguous operational failure. Far enough into the approach that no alternative interpretation was available, not yet close enough to have reached quality collection range. The number was 350 yards. There was no tactical tool on the escalation ladder designed for this specific encounter. The Vishnya was not closing at high speed. It was not threatening a collision. It was not deploying weapons or swarming or occupying airspace. It was approaching at 8 knots with its collection antennas powered up, and the only thing it wanted was for the destroyer to keep transmitting everything it was already transmitting under normal conditions. The entire operation was predicated on the destroyer behaving normally. EMCON was not on any escalation ladder because it was not an escalation. It was a subtraction. The subtraction timed with precision was more effective than any addition. CPA to Vishnya Alpha, 550 yards. Time to CPA, 19 minutes. At 1:38 p.m., the Vishnya activated its SIGINT collection suite. Arrays of antennas visible on the vessel's structure, electronic systems whose activation was detectable by the destroyer's electronic support measures and identifiable by their emission profiles as collection systems at operational readiness. The Vishnya was preparing to collect. The ESM operator in the CIC, bridge CIC. Vishnya Alpha has activated SIGINT collection arrays, reading broadband collection system emissions consistent with Vishnya AGI operational profile. They're running at full operational status. The cold outside was -23 degrees and absolutely steady. The hull made a specific sound against the low Arctic swells, a sound that Arctic crews described as the sea knocking, that the crew had been hearing for 11 hours and had stopped consciously registering 8 hours ago. It was audible now, in the bridge, over the ventilation and the radar drive. CPA to Vishnya Alpha, 510 yards. Time to CPA, 17 minutes. At 1:39 p.m., the first friction event arrived on the bridge wing. The port bridge wing lookout had been outside for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. -23 had done to his binocular eyepieces exactly what the weather report predicted. The rubber eye cups frosted over from his breath, reducing optical clarity to a function of how recently he had wiped them and how quickly the moisture refroze. He wiped them, clear for 40 seconds. Then frost again. He reported 2 things. The Vishnya, visible to the naked eye at approximately 7 miles as a dark shape against the gray southern horizon, and the fact that his right glove, trigger finger cut-off style, the Arctic compromise between warmth and dexterity, had developed a small tear at the palm seam. The dexterity of his right hand was marginally reduced. He noted it because he had been trained to note it, and because in the Barents in February, marginal dexterity reduction was the kind of information that accumulated into a picture that mattered. The captain authorized the rotation. The lookout came inside after 4 minutes and 44 seconds. The warmth of the bridge compared to the bridge wing in February was not warmth in any absolute sense, barely above 0 Celsius. But after 4 minutes and 44 seconds at -23, the contrast registered as physical relief in a way normal temperature differences did not. CPA to Vishnya Alpha, 470 yards. Time to CPA, 15 minutes. At 1:40 p.m., Channel 16 activated from Vishnya Alpha. Broadcast in Russian first, then in prepared English. United States warship currently operating in the waters of the Russian northern approaches. You are conducting unauthorized operations adjacent to Russian sovereign maritime interests and strategic assets. The Russian Federation requires you to immediately alter course away from the northern approaches and cease the current operation. This is a formal advisory under international maritime protocols. Acknowledge and comply. The broadcast was a prepared statement. Northern approaches and strategic assets had been written before the approach began, delivered to ensure it appeared in the encounter log and in every listening post monitoring Channel 16 in the Barents. Norwegian maritime surveillance stations, NATO's maritime operational headquarters, every allied intelligence service running a monitoring cell for Barents Sea naval activity. The broadcast was not attempting to change the destroyer's behavior. It was creating a record of a Russian government position being formally stated. The captain did not respond on Channel 16. CPA to Vishnya-Alpha, 430 yards. Time to CPA, 13 minutes. The corvettes, Bravo to the southeast, Charlie to the southwest, were at approximately 5.5 nautical miles on each bearing, steady at 16 knots. They would arrive at their flanking positions in approximately 13 minutes, the same window as the Vishnya's arrival at its 600-yard collection position. The formation was coordinated to arrive simultaneously. The Vishnya did not want to be alone at 600 yards from a U.S. destroyer. The corvettes provided the political standing that made the close approach a joint Russian naval operation rather than an isolated AGI incursion. CPA to Vishnya-Alpha, 390 yards. Time to CPA, 11 minutes. At 1:43 p.m., the second friction event arrived. The satellite communication system's northern coverage cell was at a low elevation angle at this latitude, increasing the atmospheric path length of the transmission and reducing available bandwidth for encrypted data. The effect? The encounter report the communications officer was preparing for 6th Fleet would take approximately 4 minutes to transmit, rather than the standard 45 seconds. The communications officer prioritized the transmission to lead with contact classifications and CPA data first, essential tactical information, followed by the situational assessment. 6th Fleet would have the critical data in 90 seconds. The full report in 4 minutes. The communications officer had already understood this and sequenced accordingly. CPA to Vishnya. Alpha, 355 yards. Time to CPA, 9 minutes. The Vishnya's collection arrays were active. Its commanding officer had been doing this for 15 years in these waters, collecting from US and NATO vessels at close range with the professionalism of someone for whom the Barents Sea in February was simply the office. He had collected from US destroyers before. He knew what a destroyer's full operational emissions profile looked like at 400 yards. He had come for that profile today because this specific destroyer's electronic systems configuration had a modification the Northern Fleet's intelligence analysts had identified in a previous pass and flagged for closer examination. There was something specific they wanted. They had sent the Vishnya 140 nautical miles north of the Kola Peninsula in February to get it. At 1:44 p.m., the CPA counter read 352 yards. The captain turned to the officer of the deck. Activate EMCON Alpha. All systems except minimum safe navigation. Navigation radar remains at minimum safe pulse rate. All other emissions cease immediately. EMCON Alpha was the most restrictive emissions control posture short of complete electronic silence. It reduced the destroyer's electromagnetic output from the full operational signature of an active naval vessel to the minimum required to navigate safely in Arctic waters, navigation radar at minimum pulse rate, compass systems, depth sounder. Everything else went silent. The fire control radar in standby mode went to off. Communication systems went to receive only. The electronic warfare suite went to passive. The weapon system's electronic components went to standby down. The Vishnya's collection consoles, which had been receiving and processing the destroyer's operational emissions for the past 10 minutes, registered a sudden change. The electromagnetic profile building in quality and density as the approach closed was replaced by the sparse signal of a ship at minimum safe navigation mode. The fire control radar emissions the Northern Fleet analysts specifically wanted to examine were no longer present. The communications patterns were no longer present. The electronic warfare system signatures were no longer present. What was present was a navigation radar pulse at minimum rate and a depth sounder signal. The Vishnya's commanding officer recognized EMCON Alpha within approximately 90 seconds of the emission change. He had encountered it before. He understood what it meant. The destroyer had seen the collection approach and had denied the collection at the moment of maximum operational cost to the Vishnya. Close enough to have committed to the approach, not close enough to have collected what it came for. CPA to Vishnya, Alpha 320 yards. Time to CPA 8 minutes. The Vishnya held its course. It held for 4 minutes after the EMCON activation, closing from 320 yards to approximately 280 yards. The commanding officer was making a calculation. At 280 yards, the Vishnya's collection systems were receiving the electromagnetic profile of a ship at minimum safe navigation emissions. That profile had some value: navigation, radar pulse characteristics, depth sounder frequency, minor electronic leakage. But it was not what the Northern Fleet analysts had sent the Vishnya to collect. The specific modification they had flagged, the system's configuration they had prioritized, none of it was present in the signal environment at 280 yards from a destroyer in EMCON Alpha. The calculation took 4 minutes. Then the Vishnya altered course, 2 degrees to the west, barely visible on the first radar sweep. The CIC tactical officer watched through a second sweep to confirm, then a third. The CPA was opening. Vishnya Alpha altering course, 2 degrees to the west. CPA now opening, projecting 340 yards and increasing. The corvettes, Bravo and Charlie, had been watching from their flanking positions. When the Vishnya altered course, both corvettes reduced speed simultaneously, 2 knots each. The deceleration that translated directly as the primary objective of this operation has changed. The captain noted the corvette speed reductions at the same moment the tactical officer reported them. He said nothing. The bridge crew did not relax. The Vishnya had altered course. The corvettes had reduced speed. The CPA was opening. That was the data. At 1:52 p.m., the Vishnya's SIGINT collection arrays deactivated. The ESM operator, Vishnya Alpha collection systems have deactivated, no longer reading broadband collection emissions from the contact. The Vishnya had come to collect. It was not collecting. It had turned off the collection equipment it had powered up and run to full readiness 14 minutes ago. That was the blink. The corvettes continued their speed reduction over the next 3 minutes. Then, both altered course east simultaneously, a coordinated departure toward the Kola Peninsula. No Channel 16 broadcast, no signal. They slowed, turned, and proceeded east with the professional dignity of operators completing a mission they would log as concluded. CPA to Vishnya Alpha, 480 yards and continuing to open. At 1:55 p.m., the captain authorized EMCON stand-down. Secure EMCON Alpha. Resume normal emissions profile. The destroyer's systems came back to operational status and protocol sequence. Navigation systems first, then electronic warfare suite passive, then communications to full transmit receive, then fire control radar to standby. 4 minutes to complete. When it was complete, the destroyer was back at its standard operational emissions profile, radiating the full electromagnetic signature of an active U.S. Navy warship. The Vishnya, at this point, was at 620 yards and opening. Whatever intelligence value a collection at 620 yards and opening would have had was essentially nil. The collection geometry was wrong, the range was wrong, and the destroyer had demonstrated that EMCON was available at any moment, which meant any subsequent collection approach carried the same risk of denial at critical range. The Northern Fleet analysts' specific requirement had not been met. No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment after the EMCON stand-down. The helmsman had held course 045 for 3 hours and 22 minutes through the Arctic swell pattern of the Barents Sea. His hands were at 10 and 2, the posture of a helmsman who had been working manual control in conditions requiring continuous minor input to maintain heading against the current and the swell. The cold had been the context, the constant, the third party that was still there when the Russian contacts were gone. It maintained equal indifference to the outcomes of both sides' tactical calculations. The officer of the deck exhaled once, quietly. He adjusted his collar. It had not needed adjusting. The bridge wing lookout who had come inside with the torn glove seam had been replaced twice since then. Each replacement had been outside for their allotted 4 minutes before the cold became an operational variable rather than a background condition. The cold was the one element of this standoff that had not changed with the departure of the Russian formation. The Vishnya was gone. The corvettes were gone. The Channel 16 broadcast was in the log. The ESM records were packaged for the intelligence officer. The cold remained at -23, indifferent to outcomes, maintaining its grip on the binocular eyepieces and the glove seams and the specific metabolic arithmetic of sustained Arctic watch operations. That was the Barents Sea. The tactical situation had resolved. The Arctic had not. The captain walked to the chart table. The transit was continuing. The ice pack was 90 miles north, the Kola Peninsula 140 miles south, and the northern sea route extended east for another 300 nautical miles. He confirmed position, noted fuel state, and read the 6th Fleet response that had arrived 12 minutes into the standoff. Understood. Continue transit. Report outcome. The outcome was in the encounter log. It had already been transmitted. Resume normal watch rotation. Full encounter report to 6th Fleet. Include EMCON activation log, collection system deactivation data, and ESM package. ESM records to intelligence officer for fleet analysis. He looked at the chart once more. Continue transit. At the hatchway, he paused. Good watch. The record assembled here speaks in the language the ocean keeps. 1 Russian Vishnya-class intelligence collection vessel and 2 Steregushchiy-class corvettes established a 3-point approach formation around a U.S. destroyer, conducting a lawful northern sea route transit in the Barents Sea at 1:34 p.m. The Vishnya activated full SIGINT collection arrays at 1:38 p.m. and approached on a direct intercept course. Combined displacement of Russian formation, approximately 9,400 tons. Vishnya CPA at point of EMCON activation, 352 yards. Vishnya CPA at point of course change, 280 yards. EMCON Alpha activated, yes, at 1:44 p.m. at 352 yards. Duration, 11 minutes. Vishnya collection systems active prior to EMCON, yes. Collection quality after EMCON activation, degraded to minimum recoverable emissions. Collection systems deactivated, yes, at 1:52 p.m. Channel 16 Sovereignty broadcast from Russian formation, 1. U.S. destroyer response, 0. Time from Vishnya course change to full formation withdrawal, 23 minutes. Arctic temperature at bridge wing during standoff, minus 23 degrees Celsius. Weapons authorized, no. Weapons released, no. Course alterations by U.S. destroyer, 0. Speed reductions under formation pressure, 0. The Barents Sea does not care about intelligence collection requirements or Northern Fleet operational schedules. It provides the cold equally to both sides. The Vishnya came 140 nautical miles north of the Kola Peninsula in February to collect a specific emissions profile. The profile was denied at 352 yards with a 4-word order that shut down $11 million of electromagnetic output and left the most sophisticated collection vessel in the Russian Navy at close range with nothing to collect. The transit continued. The cold remained. Both were expected.